I work at the Linux Foundation at several projects. So one of the PyTorch Foundation. For those who doesn't know PyTorch, one of the largest machine learning frameworks. And the Tutor Group, that it's a community of practice of open source program offices and people working in open source strategy and management within organizations. And I'm here, I will be sharing some insights from the work done in that specific community. And Dawn?
Thank you. I'm Dawn Foster. Right now I'm working mostly on the CHAOSS project, so I am the director of data science there. But my background has always been working more in open source program offices, so I've spent the past 25 plus years working on open source at companies like VMware and Intel, and working mostly in and around things related to open source program offices. So I also am the co-chair of the CHAOSS OSPO working group, where we talk about how OSPOs can use metrics and data to improve.
Okay, so the agenda, we're gonna be based this workshop on a community resource that is called the OSPO book that has been written and used by several people working at organizations with an open source program office. So I'll get into that. So we did the intros already. And let me share a really brief story of the OSPO book that is the source of truth we'll be using for today's workshop. So the OSPO book is one of the resources, let me see. Oh, okay, now it goes. One of the resources created by several organizations, part of the Tutor Group community. It's a community of practice. We are now more than 90 organizations with established open source program office or a body capable of managing open source operations and strategy in the organization. We are hosted under the Linux Foundation. Our mission is to build an unified open source strategy bodies in organizations, and we do that through shared tooling and through shared resources frameworks. The model we follow, we have a steering committee, we have organizations members that are trusted people that has deep experience in open source program offices and open source operations. They give this credibility, they communicate back industry challenges, and then we have the community based on the ambassadors that helps to drive advocacy. They have local chapters across different regions to translate these learnings across different countries and locations, and then we have the project leads managing different resources and initiatives within the community, and we collaborate with the open source ecosystem in terms of different industry and sectors such as security, such as metrics and project health, and so on. And the OSPO book is one of these resources. We are more than 20 subject matter experts that has been contributing in collaboration, shared learnings, and this is free and this is open. Everyone can use, adapt, and share. And this is where we are going basing our workshop today. So hope you learn something by the end of this session.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. So one of the first chapters in the book is this introduction to open source program offices. And when we talk about open source program offices, you don't necessarily need to call it an OSPO. So that's kind of the framework that we're using, because that's what the to-do group calls it. But throughout this workshop, and when you're thinking about it, sometimes it's called an open source program office, sometimes it's called something else. Sometimes open source program offices cover certain bits of the work and not others. So think about this as just kind of a flexible framework to think about open source. So OSPOs are really designed to be kind of this center of gravity, this competency unit for an entire organization's open source operations. And with that, they also usually set the open source strategy along with the policies for that particular organization. And then that means a lot of different things, right? So it also means facilitating cross-functional collaboration across a whole bunch of different perspectives. So one is, downward. So if you're leading an open source program office, for example, the OSPO really has to manage the team's tasks effectively. And, in some cases, that's, a direct team. I've seen some OSPOs organized where it's kind of a matrix where they have, for example, legal people, security people who are kind of dotted lined into that. But, however it's structured, you need to make sure that the work that has to happen for the OSPO to function, that's being done effectively. So that's generally one of the functions of an OSPO. But it's also upward, and I think that this is probably, I don't know, from my perspective, I think this is probably the most important function of an open source program office, is managing expectations and aligning with executives. Because if that's not done well, and the executives don't understand what you're doing or why you exist, it's really hard to continue to get funding and resources and employees to continue that work. So this upward managing expectations is really, really important for these open source offices. And then there's also a whole bunch of sideways collaboration. So when I worked at VMware, we had an open source program office that was under the Office of the CTO, which was a neutral place to have an open source program office. But we spent a ton of time working across a whole bunch of different VMware business units and VMware product teams to help them work on open source. So there was also all of this sideways collaboration across the entire organization, which is pretty common for open source program offices. And then there's the outward-facing work, so representing the organization to the external communities. So maybe this is working upstream in external communities for software that's important to you. Maybe this is working within foundations, like the Eclipse Foundation, the Linux Foundation. Maybe this is working with other companies to partner together to work on open source for something that's mutually beneficial. So this outside representing the organization is also incredibly important. And it becomes a really nice way for recruiting, because if people see you visibly outside in these open source communities, you might look like a more attractive place to work. Okay, so I've spent a little bit of time talking about OSPOs. Okay, I can say, the clicker, I point the other direction. All right, so now the group work. All right, is everybody ready? So this is where you work in teams. So we're gonna give you about 10 minutes. I'm not sure where we are in time. And I've put a few questions. You can use these questions, you can use something else. But some of these questions, do you think your organization needs an OSPO? What does open source really mean for your organization? Because it's different depending on the organization you're in. What are your goals for using open source? What are the policies and procedures that you're going to need? What are the challenges that are going to happen when you try to implement an OSPO in your organization if you don't already have one? And which resources and support will be needed to successfully implement an OSPO within your organization?
We're moving to the next chapter of the book. I hope you had insightful conversations and you were able to shed light into some of these questions. Let me check. Okay, now let's move to the day-to-day operations. So by the first chapter, you might have already seen OSPOs are overstaffed. They have so many tasks and things to do. Depending on the organization's goals. Some of are more aligned with risk mitigation, security, others about community engagement, open source culture within the organization, right? So in the to-do group, we developed a tool that is called the OSPO mind map, where we started to map all the different responsibilities that open source program office people have been doing in their role. And it has a wide variety of activities, and doesn't mean that they need to cover all of this, but there was a pain point in many OSPOs that were, okay, how do I start? What should I prioritize? And it's always the same thing, is what does the organization want from you? Why did they build the OSPO? What are their needs? And what are the different team needs, right? So they can be really categorized into these 4 areas: strategy, partnerships, policy risk, measurement and impact, and engineering experience and platform. That last one's more related with developer experience, developer advocacy, and so on. And the thing is, while thinking about these activities, in parallel, you need to think about where is the organization at in their open source journey. Because depending on the knowledge and and how they have enabled open source in the past, there might be activities that they cannot perform because they are not ready yet. Other ones, they are far beyond. So when thinking about what activities can the OSPO do for the organization, think also about where the organization are in their open source journey. Are they just consuming open source? If you say that they are not consuming, that is not true. They are consuming, but perhaps you don't see it yet, or the organization doesn't see it yet. Perhaps you need to do a scan about what open source dependencies does your projects rely on, and then share to the organization, hey, we are spending all this technical debt in open source. And once they might be saying, oh, we are consuming open source, but we are not participating actively in open source, right? Like we are not involved in the communities. Or perhaps they're already making some contributions to open source projects that are critical to their infrastructure, to risk, to contributing upstream patches to mitigate risk, and so on. So as you grow in this ladder, the autonomy of the organization is going to grow. They're going to be more autonomous to make choices on which projects to choose and which projects to discard. But it's also going to take more time. And of course, the speed is going to change depending on if the organization is a government, for instance, or it's a software technology company. The time and the efforts and resources that will take to this transition are going to be completely different. So, again, all these tasks needs to be applied to your own organization's culture and goals to make sense. So for the group work, we're going to spend roughly 10 minutes, perhaps a little bit less, to save time. And we want you to think about where is your organization in their open source journey first, right? To map where with the questions that you have been trying to answer before. And, okay. And try to state the activities you'll prioritize and the value for the organization that brings that activities, and the value for your open source program offices, because one of the things is also to be able to sustain the entity in the long term, and also why. And perhaps once you have a couple or 3 or 4 activities that you will prioritize and put into which category, if it's in participant or in consumer, and so try to speak with your colleague, with your partner, and see what difference are, and see like if there are any common points or differences. I also have to say that if you go to the ospbook.todogroup.org, you will see all the chapters. You have all this information there as well, and there is a link to the OSPO mind map with all those activities. But I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Okay, how's everybody doing? We've got one more bit of group work for you today, and that's going to be around security. So we've had a lot of discussions throughout the day about how open source software is a really important part of the overall software supply chain. It's in everything, and it's generally part of an open source program office's responsibility to help secure the open source supply chain. So an OSPO can really help an organization prevent security issues, maybe reduce the chances of having those security issues or reduce the impact if they do happen, and be prepared in case something goes wrong. So that's kind of around being able to mitigate some of the issues you might have with security. One of the things that's really, really important is security training and education, because let's face it, a lot of developers and a lot of managers often don't know what they need to know about security. It's in a lot of software development programs, they don't teach you a whole lot about how to make your software secure, and it's often done as an afterthought. So having some more proactive training and really teaching people what they need to know to design that security in from the beginning is something that an open source program office can really help with. And there are a couple of key steps. So again, you'll find these in the OSPO book chapter, but a really good resource is the OpenSSF's guides, as well as the tools. So tools like criticality score, tools like the scorecard, to make sure that the open source software you develop is secure. And then when it comes to choosing which open source components to use, you can do this carefully with security in mind. So too often, I think developers pull things in without really necessarily understanding the security implications of that library that they just included in one of your products or in your infrastructure. And then your OSPO can also help your organization protect your environments. So this includes things like development, build, test, and distribution processes. And then also, an OSPO can help with some of the automated tooling, right? So automated tools that you can use in your continuous integration, CI/CD pipelines, to catch security issues early. So that's a brief overview, and we'll move to the group work. Okay, so again, you'll have maybe a few minutes, less than 10 minutes, to apply this to your organization. So we have a few questions that you can use to help frame it. Again, the chapter's listed right there at the bottom if you want a little more insight. But what are some of the changes in culture, daily work processes that would help you improve security? And more than that, create a culture of shared responsibility around security. How can you build security into the whole developer workflow? What training and education do you need? And how can you make that an ongoing process as opposed to something you do once and then forget about? And what can you do to encourage teams to be open and create a positive environment around the progress that they're making on security? And how do you continuously improve it? So we'll give you a few less than 10 minutes to do this particular exercise, and then we should have about 5 or 10 minutes at the end to share learnings. So we'll ask a few people to come up and tell us maybe 1 or 2 things that you learned. So keep that in mind if you're interested in sharing. So so go ahead and work in your groups. We'll be here if you have any questions.
All right, so time's up. I hope you have had some learnings from this session. Let's now move to the last part, that are shared learnings. So for this, we would like to call 1, 2, or 3 volunteers that would like to share their learnings and come with us on stage? Any volunteers who would like to share their story and what they have learned? Raise your hand.
All right, so we just have a couple of minutes, so you can't share everything you learned, but maybe, Manrique, do you want to share a couple of key learnings?
Well, in the table we were discussing about the different kind of OSPOs, actually. I was coming from an industrial retail company that has an OSPO, and we were discussing about academics-related OSPOs. And basically the goals, the vision, the objectives of both OSPOs are very different. Why they think about open source, why they want to do open source, contribute back to open source, the value they see is quite different.
So yeah, on that theme of different OSPOs, what is it we were saying the to-do group? My OSPO is not your OSPO. Yeah, we talked a little bit about how some OSPO sort of responsibilities will be kind of distributed and delegated to individual engineering teams. You might also have split between, say, license compliance might be done by the OSPO, but security might be, open source security might be handled by the centralized security team. And then on the security theme, our main takeaway on security was dependency hell is real and package managers are difficult.
Yeah, I don't remember, did you say like what kind of industry or specializations when you were talking with your peers did they came from? Like?
Yeah, so there was 2 of us from the BBC and 2 people from an agency. So yeah, quite different experiences.
Did you find any commons? Like I know that you mentioned that from industry versus academic, there were many differences, but I'm curious to know if there were any common points that you said, well, this is something that an OSPO, no matter where they are, they need to do. Yes or yes?
Well, we found 2 common topics. One, how to manage SLAs, software license agreement, when you're an academic student or you are employee for a third party that is working for a corporation. So basically, is the university signing the SLA in your name? You are signing in the name of the university when you're not part of the university or you're not part of the corporation. So that legal aspect is a common pain for both OSPOs. And the other was about security. All the teaching we can do about security and how important it is, we think it's not working. Basically, people don't have time to manage all the security aspects. And usually, in the corporation, for example, it's all about we have enough barriers to ensure that we don't need to work that strong in security because there are already barriers to avoid issues. And then nightmare happens.
Do you have anything to add to that, Tom?
Yeah, I think we had similar experiences, really. Yeah, nothing to really add.
So what were some of the challenges with having an OSPO that you talked about at your tables?
Yeah, so we talked about sort of funding, and on that theme I was talking about before of distributed responsibilities, the potential for if open source is really widespread and the sort of local engineering managers kind of understand and can handle the open source side of things, then there's maybe less need for an OSPO in that kind of organization, and it's more about a little bit of centralized tooling and education and resources to then enable the local engineering leaders to manage the open source.
In our table, the challenges, one of the first discussions was about what does open source mean for each role in the organization? Because for students it means one thing, for teachers or researchers mean another thing, for the managers means another thing, and how to align all those different meanings of open source in a single OSPO that needs to give them a strategy, a vision, a mission, and values to work together on that. And it's a challenge because each one of them wants you as an OSPO to do certain things. I want you to engage the community. I want you to attract new developers. I want you to make impact in the community. I want you to, come on, stop. I need to focus. Usually we are small teams. I don't know how many are you in your OSPO, but in my organization, we used to be one person and a half, 175,000 employees and 1.5 persons for an OSPO. So imagine that. and that's it.
Any last thoughts?
The kind of that so many different angles, isn't there? Are you interested in consuming or contributing, participating? Actually, one thing that did come up on the participating, contributing side was not getting recognition or reward for contributing upstream. So, if a company is investing in open source and and is benefiting from it, the employees that are contributing in their work hours should be recognized and encouraged. So all too often it's people on their weekends doing it.
Just wanted to add to that, I think when talking with many organizations, they focus a lot on the value that is from top to bottom. It is sharing to management the value and so on, but sometimes we forget about how important is that in the similar amount to go from bottom to up. Like, what do engineers and developers get from contributing? There is a lot of developer advocacy, developer experience work. So yeah, totally hear you.
Yeah, and just to add to that a little bit, I think that one of the things that can help OSPOs is if they can really make the connection between use and contribution. So you use some open source projects, and the contribution piece is making them better so that you can use them more easily, or maybe it's, you can improve the security, you can add some features you need, you can fix some bugs that you need, and being able to connect those two so that your executives can really see the value of the work that you're doing when you're contributing, because it's impacting and making better the usage of those software packages.
Okay, we have just a few minutes left, so thank you so much for sharing your insights with us. Thank you, everyone. Just wanted to share, if you're around Europe this week and next week, and you happen to be in Lyon or nearby, or you want to visit Lyon, we're doing an OSPology workshop with several players from the energy sectors. It's RT France, one of the energy sectors providers in France. OSPO is hosting this in collaboration with LF Energy and other communities such as Curious, to the group, Chaos, Open Chain, and so on. And we have a lot of really interesting mentors and players that will be doing hands-on workshops, roundtable discussions, and panels. So we're still having 5 or 6 seats left. Registration is free, and if you happen to be in Lyon or you want to visit Lyon next week, feel free to join and RSVP. Thank you.